All right, Kevin, back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And today I'm here with Bob Norton. Bob, welcome. So awesome to have you on the show today.
It's a pleasure. I always enjoy doing these. I think I've done like 200 podcasts now.
Wow, wow, you've definitely done a few. You got a little bit of experience in this area, Bob.
Yeah.
So,
Well, yeah, 100 of those were hosting a nonprofit cause-oriented program for a couple of
okay.
years.
Well,
Yeah.
very cool. Well, I can tell you, I've been you know what? Actually, this month is our 4 year anniversary since we launched this podcast.
Well,
And
congratulations.
how many we've released like 374 episodes now. And we're
75 a
releasing
year.
two a
That's pretty,
week.
that's a pretty rapid rate. That's more than one a week, right?
Yeah, yeah, we're doing two a week, and I will tell you, it has been the most impactful thing I've done as an entrepreneur in my 31 years as an entrepreneur. I absolutely love hosting this podcast and just talking with entrepreneurs.
You're
And
going to be talking to the right people. There's an old saying, I forget who it's from, but having lunch with a wise man is worth reading 10 books, right?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, yes. Well, and I want to, I want to start off because you and I met because of John Bailey. John Bailey was the one who introduced us, and I just want to shout out to John because if not for him, you and I probably never would have met. And it's just wonderful to connect through somebody that you already got a great relationship with.
Yeah, he appears to be one of the most professional networkers I've ever seen and has systematized all that in a way
Yeah.
that, causes more connections and nexus of people probably than anyone I know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll tell you, we'll start our conversation. I'll just ask you a real simple question to kick things off. And, what do you do, Bob, and who do you serve? Because you've got quite a reputation. You've got a powerful reputation.
Yeah, over 40 years. And so the short version of that is I started as a technologist, as a software engineering. My first job was working for a division of Grumman Aerospace on the Apple computer.
Okay.
And I had 8 years as a technologist, ending as a chief technical officer after, going through being an architect and a software development manager and all the steps you go through very rapidly. And I was lucky enough to be able to ride the microcomputer wave. And so my limited experience when I was young was as much as anyone could ever have in that area, right? Because it was such a new technology.
Uh-huh.
So I spent 8 years as a technologist, and then I founded my first company in 1989, which was the first high definition virtual touring company for residential real estate called HomeView.
Oh,
It was financed with $34 million from IBM, and it scared the heck out of the industry and catalyzed the movement from, color, black and white books with 1 inch pictures of homes
mhm.
to full virtual tours. This was back in 1989. And of course, no one would shop for real estate without using that, but we were the first to use high definition digital photos to save people the driving time and let them see 100 homes in a day instead of three or four.
Yeah.
So that took the average visits of a home down from 34 to about seven.
Wow.
And, and of course, that was a big productivity boost for the industry and
You
a time
bet.
saver for the buyer. That was eventually sold to Prudential. And so that was the first company I founded myself and sold. I was a co founder at Thomson Reuters before that. At the time, it was called Thomson Financial Services, and I ran all the product development there. So that was the end of my technical part of my career. I created 5 products in 5 years, and each of those became a 20 plus $1 million business in 1980s dollars, within a few years. So, I had
Wow.
1,000 batting average. And I think that was because I'm kind of crazy about going out and learning constantly. And I spent time with the customers and I knew the technology, and I knew how to sort of bring the technology together with the pain of the customer to solve the needs. So we created some products that became global monopolies effectively, as a result of that leapfrogging and using microcomputer technology when everyone else was still on mainframes and mini computers. So
Okay.
that was, 8 years of technology, 14 years. I was a serial entrepreneur. I founded and sold four companies. I've mentioned two of those already. And then now for a little over 20 years, I've been advising boards and CEOs on startups and scaling and growth. Really, my expertise that's unique is around the systemization of scaling companies, because only 1 in 400 companies ever reaches 10 million, and only 1 in 6,300 ever reaches 100 million, which I did twice in a row with my own startups. So I've kind of got this systemization and scaling it. It merges my engineering background with the art and science of entrepreneurship and
Yeah.
management and leadership. I also co-wrote a book with Dr. Warren Venus, the father of leadership, about 10 or 15 years back. He's deceased now. I think he died in 2012, so maybe it was longer than that. I can't even remember what the publication date was, but I published about 6 books, ebooks, mainly self-published, on entrepreneurship and management, and related topics.
Okay. So what percentage of businesses did you say reach each level that you were mentioning there?
Well, in percentage terms,
Or
it's 1 in 400, so 0.25%
okay.
will reach $10 million, which is not even a big business. Big
Yeah.
businesses, the Small Business Administration classifies a medium-sized business as 100 employees to 1,000, and a large business as over 1,000, right? Of course, there's many definitions of that,
Sure.
but a small business is 10 million, and once you get to 100 million, 100 million, you might be approaching 500 or 1,000, so you could start to call it a big business. So
Mhm.
that would be, I don't know what the fraction of that is. It's 1 in 6,300 companies, so you
One
have
in
the pop.
6,300.
That's
Yeah.
correct. So it's like winning the lottery, or the gold medal at the
Yeah.
Olympics. That it's
Yeah.
so rare.
And you did it twice. And so and now you for the last 20 years you just been
And I've helped
helping.
others do it with,
Yeah.
many $100 million exits as well. So two
Wow.
two companies that I founded myself. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So what inspires you most about the work that you get to do, Bob, and the impact that you get to make?
Well, I just love challenge. And, unlike a lot of people, I love to think, let my head spin. And
Hmm.
I love learning new things. My dad and others have taught me that in my career. And, I think if I don't learn something new every day, I don't feel fulfilled.
Okay.
So, I was blessed with a very high IQ, but I think even more success comes from constant learning,
Yeah.
and also creativity. If you put those three things together, if you can do all of those things, then you're looking at, high potential to get, massive world changing things done. If you got creativity, intellect, and hard work to drive and learn, you can have a big impact.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and you've definitely proven that. So what is an example? And you don't have to name names here, although you can if you want to. But what is the result that you've helped a client get that you are just incredibly proud of, Bob?
Well, if you focus on my most recent work advising companies, I guess the ability to go in and think about a case study without naming names to, sort of a struggling founder. Every founder gets to the point where they're beyond their experience, right? They're
Mhm.
hitting new
Mhm.
ground, right?
Yeah.
So the ability to come in and help them build a team and help them organize that. So, one client that I like to tell a story of, because I've written a white paper on it, it's a great case study, is a doctor that owned four locations of medical scanning clinics.
Okay.
And I went in and I essentially helped build the management team and train them and professionalize the cadence of management, most companies don't really have a lot of structure in the way they do things, and they tend to do things, kind of as a conglomeration of the management team's past experiences, as opposed to in a systematized way that allows them to get better, called Kaizen. If you heard the term Kaizen, that's a
Mhm.
Japanese term for getting a little better every day
Yes.
without ending, right? It's
Yeah.
constant and never ending improvement is the Americanization of that term, kanai, right? But it means constantly looking at ways to improve, assuming you've never reached perfection and incrementally improving. And that doesn't just mean your product or your service,
Yeah.
it means all your internal systems. So applying that thinking to sales, marketing, finance, product development, operations, and every other area, those are the five generic, departments or areas that a business has. But every one of them has innovation opportunity. I don't care what business you're in, you can constantly get better and improve, partially because technologies are always changing, right? I mean, right now with AI, we've got this big surge, and every company can improve itself by leveraging, AI technology. Basically,
Mhm.
if you're not using AI every day in every major task you do, you're a fool because it knows a million times what you will ever know. And if you just take your work and throw it at AI and say, what do you think about this? It's going to stimulate some ideas. And it's a dumb assistant. It doesn't have wisdom and context and experience, which people don't understand well. But it has so much knowledge that kind of makes up for it because it won't give you any new and creative ideas because by definition it's a database of what people have done in the past,
Okay.
right? So it's not going to break new ground. It's not going to, as Henry Ford said, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, right? It's not going to come up with the next brilliant creative idea, but it's going to be a great partner in stimulating you and being a sounding board. And of course, doing instant research. You can do market research on a business idea now in an hour
Yeah.
that would have cost $20,000 and taken 6 weeks, back in 2000. You would have had
Isn't
to
that
hire a
just
marketing
phenomenal?
company. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And the things that happen now, I was on a call with another business person today that, she develops golf course developments, and she said she now writes her own private placement memorandums, in half a day that would have cost her $5,000 to hire someone to do it
Yeah.
using AI. So, I mean, there's an example of that in probably every business. Of course, when it's text in and text out, that's the dominant technology today with large language models that
Yeah.
have made this great leap in the last several years.
Yeah.
But image generation and multimodal, and as I was telling you before we started the call, I'm putting up a Bob AI clone on my website next week that is programmed with over 1 million words of my training and research and models that will be able to interact with people and help guide them to the right products and services and ideas and even do a growth audit on their business.
Wow.
We'll,
Wow.
we'll put a link to that in the
Sure.
podcast. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So what's your vision for that from your current vantage point, Bob?
Well, it's meant to, because my offering is so broad, I've got 55 courses, 6 professional certifications, 6 books. Probably, if you took all the permutations, there might be 20 different services with CEO coaching and our airtight management 6 systems, which is strategy, dashboards, process management, skunkworks, innovation development, and human resources, or we call it HCAD, human capital acquisition and development. So the number of permutations of things there is mind blowing. And
Mhm.
so when someone lands on our website, getting them to the right stuff based on their stage of development and a few key questions is important. So that's the main goal of that AI clone,
Okay.
is to diagnose where that person is in their company stage of development. Are they ideation? and they're just trying to form a vision? Or are they established business that's, trying to break into a new market but have some revenue? Or are they optimizing? Are they a larger business that's looking to optimize their profitability and grow their markets? I believe any business can become, literally $100 million business. I don't care if you run a popcorn stand outside the local little league game. If you innovate constantly and work on that and increase distribution, you can grow a business almost indefinitely.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. It's really interesting talking with because I don't know. In fact, I don't know anybody else who has built two companies to the level that you have built two companies and then now helped a bunch of other entrepreneurs do the same thing and stuff. Um, it's you're in very rare air, And
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you multiply 6,300 squared, it's a 1 in 39 million
yeah,
chance of doing that twice in a row, right?
yeah, 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 that's pretty doggone rare, And so, what I mean, so I'm just trying to figure out how to phrase this. Um, because our listeners, I know for a fact because I interview most of them too and stuff. So they're running businesses anywhere from 500,000 on up to, Shelly, she built her company to 750 million before selling it and stuff. So and everything in between. But what I do know is that every one of these entrepreneurs are using their business as the vehicle to make their biggest impact. And so the kind of stuff that you're talking about is really resonating with them and stuff. And so I guess and I know the question I would ask would be it's going to be different depending on where they're at in their growth phase and stuff. And
Yeah, that's right. Most business books are kind of vanilla, and they're broadened for the average employee at a big company, right?
yeah,
Because that's the
yeah,
target of most of these books. And the fact is, the answer to any one question is always dependent on your situation and your stage,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
A lawyer will always say, well, it depends, right? And the same is true of a good consultant
yeah.
because, prescription without diagnosis is malpractice,
Yes.
right? If you don't know where they're coming from and what their mindset is, what their team is, what their cash flow is, what their budget is, what their market is like, it's malpractice to answer any question with confidence
Yeah.
because you're just misleading them without that context.
Yeah. 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 Well, I can guarantee you, we've got people listening in right now thinking to themselves, man, it sure would be great to get some more insight from Bob or somebody on his team or some this AI resource that you're talking about. And yes, I'll make sure you're covered and that we've got resources we share at the end of the show here. And we include stuff with the
And we've
show.
got lots of free courses. There's like 9 free courses we provide, and most of my
Okay.
ebooks are free. So we're going to put that link in with the
Perfect.
podcast for people to
Perfect.
access to. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So now that we've got a little bit of context set here and people understand, a little bit about what you do and who you are and the kind of results that not only you have got for yourself, but for others too, I want to switch gears just a little bit. And I want to talk about the relationship side of this for a minute, because this is really important too. And so, have you ever been introduced to a person or persons who completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And I'm just really excited to hear your story and your experience around this topic of relationships, Bob.
Well, yeah, it's hard to answer that as one person. To me, I look at it and it's sort of a mosaic of
Uh-huh.
several people at different stages of my life. My father was a great example of hard work and intelligence, and he taught me to be a constant learner. In high school, I had a mentor who I spent hours a day with after school every year, who was head of the physics and electronics and computers and ham radio stuff. So
Oh,
that turned me into a nerd, which long before it was cool, to grow in technology. And I guess it also gave me a lot of structured thinking and allowed me to be successful at my early endeavors in engineering and software development and break a lot of new boundaries in terms of what the PC could do, because we were always on the bleeding edge and pushing things with the newest technology in the PC world. Talking back in the 80s now, right? When the
yep.
first PCs came out in 78 to 81 with the Apple IIe and the first IBM PC, which is, 1/1,000,000th the power, of what we have today. I mean,
Yeah.
I spent weeks writing an assembler language program to add 16K of memory to the Apple IIe operating system, right? And
Wow. Wow.
that's like 1,000th of a picture on your
Yeah.
phone nowadays, right? But it was a strategic advantage way back then
Yeah.
because our competitors didn't have it, and so our programs could be 25% bigger than our competitors' programs, so we could
Mhm.
do more. So, looping back to the mentorship, I then had, one of my first bosses, just allowed me to run wild and gave me big projects and didn't give me any limits and was always pleased, that, he'd give me a piece of work that he thought was going to take a week and I'd be back in a day or two and it was
Wow.
done. And he was surprised, but I think it was because I started programming in high school, so
Mhm.
my mind was sort of neuroplastized very early, to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I then had, a boss who was great as the VP of engineering who hired me at Thompson, and I eventually took his role when he left and became, vice president of engineering and chief technical officer there. And he taught me a lot about startups
Okay.
that I learned previously. Because the startup world is very different. It's it's in the trenches, raw knuckles, hard work,
Mhm.
always doing things new that are very high risk and having to get knocked down and get up again. It's always a roller coaster ride to start any company, and you have to be both flexible and resilient.
Yeah.
To pivot the company in a direction that's going to work, because hardly ever does sort of a first idea or a first product work unless you've lived in that domain space and grown up in it and really understand everything about it. And rarely is that the case, but you bring in people who bring that domain experience to help guide, the product development or the service development that's going to happen. So those are three or four major mentors that have created me along the way,
Yeah.
little by little in different stages of my
You
life.
bet.
I'm really happy that I have that burning desire to constantly learn and to think.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're constantly learning, you're going to achieve some great things.
Yeah. For sure. For sure. What's an example of a situation where you personally, Bob, got to make a really substantial impact, and maybe even in the moment, maybe it surprised you a little bit, and yet you also knew that, if not, that would have never been possible if not for your relationship with any one of the people that you just mentioned. What's an example of something where you were empowered that way through one of these people that you've mentioned?
Um, well, I look at it as a big bucket and a mix, and it's hard to pick a story of just one.
Okay.
But but I think any client I go into and any situation I go into, I'm bringing the result of, 40, 50 years
Yeah.
of experience and learning.
Yeah.
And so it's hard not to give all of them a little credit
Yeah.
because it's a recipe
Yeah.
of things. that I've learned along the way between, sales, marketing, finance, product development, operations, engineering, entrepreneurship, management, psychology. I mean, all of those things that you have to know something about to be a good leader
Yeah.
or to found a company.
Yeah.
So, it's hard to pin a success on one person because it's a conglomeration of
Yeah.
all of that
Yeah.
learning
Yeah.
in every one of my successes. I think,
Yeah.
there's a great saying that I love, which is, I often rephrase it as, I've stolen all the best ideas of the great leaders, right? The euphemism of that is I've built everything on the shoulders of great men, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is, if you're learning from other people constantly and reading books and out there trying new things, you're probably going to break new ground
Yeah.
eventually because
Yeah.
you're taking all the proven elements and you're building on top of that. So I think that's all of our jobs is, that's how we have a big impact on the world with a company is,
Absolutely.
is to take all of the best practices and ideas. And that's one of the reasons I founded Airtight Management, the company I have today. And we have three different product lines of intellectual property. And I've spent 40 years curating all the best ideas of management science and leadership and skunkworks innovation and product development and all of those things. And people think AI is going to do that for them, but the reality is it's a database of facts and it doesn't have that broad context and that broad wisdom. You've got to have humans in the loop
Yeah.
to do all of this stuff because I think I've heard a comparison, and I don't know the numbers literally, but even the most complex AI absorbs less information than a 3-year-old child, right?
Wow.
It's just
Wow.
that because the human brain is taking in over 20 megabits of information per second visually, right? And so if you were to scrape up all the internet, it's still only a few years of human input,
Yeah. Yeah.
and of course it's organized better and it looks a lot smarter because it knows esoteric facts that few human beings on the planet knows, but that doesn't make it smarter. That's like a library, right?
That's right. Yeah. 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 Well, for anybody listening to this and thinking to themselves, man, Kev, I really appreciate the fact that you took the time to interview Bob and that he got on here with you. But I'm really fascinated by some of the stuff that he's done and some of the stuff that he's shared. And I would like to find out more about them and what they do. And heck, maybe they can help us, or maybe they're thinking of somebody else that they're like, I got to tell them, my friend, about Bob. Any websites, any resources we can share with folks?
Well, my main website is airtightgrowth.com.
Okay.
We also have a website called Entrepreneurship U, which
Uh-huh.
is our entrepreneurship training that has the 55 courses and the 6 professional certifications for managers.
Okay.
It's it's a what professional big companies call a learning and development platform, which means it's a management training growth path of all the learning that people need to climb the corporate ladder. Of
Okay.
course, it leans towards the smaller companies that I specialize working with. I don't work with many Fortune 2000 companies unless it's a division of them and they're sort of spinning off a new company from a big company or something like that. But
Okay.
airtightgrowth.com is the first place. I do have a YouTube channel. Just search Bob Norton Airtight, and I'm
Okay.
sure you'll find that easily. And like I said, we'll put the free resources because I've got about 9 courses and 4 ebooks that I give away for free that
Okay.
are just lead generation free gifts for people to get to know me and leverage some of my past lessons.
Okay.
You get a lot of scars as an entrepreneur, and it's not a failure, it's a learning experience, right? You've
That's
got to have
right.
You got to have that optimism and that way of looking at things,
Yes.
and know
Yeah.
that every time you make a mistake, hopefully that's a mistake you'll never make again for the rest of your life, right?
That's right. That's right. It's a learning experience. And and it's interesting that the ones that cost us the most are the ones that we remember the most and hopefully are the most valuable for us too. It's
Yeah, I've had people come to my CEO boot camp and literally say, if I knew that a year ago, it would have saved me $20 million. dollars.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me one bit because
Yeah.
yeah, that's yeah. Well, is there any last thing that you feel led to share, Bob, before we call it a wrap?
Well, I just recommend that prospective business owners or people that want to launch a startup learn on someone else's dime first. As I did, I think a lot of people have this false belief that you can, get a degree and go out and found a company. And I guess if you're a content creator and all you got to do is talk in front of a microphone, that might work. But it doesn't work in most businesses. You've got to learn people skills. You've got to learn
Mhm.
management, hiring people. You've got to learn about finance and business and how, potentially how to raise money. So I recommend that people spend at least 5 to 8 years working for other people before they found a business. I
Yeah.
often don't want to work with a client as a coaching client unless they have, that kind of background, because their odds are going to go up massively if they have that learning experience before they jump into the risk pool of the startup world.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And find a co-founder would be another very important piece of advice. The odds of success are much higher because you now have two experience sets, right? You have to hopefully not exactly overlapping, right? They're complementary. And you also potentially have two networks to tap into to find advisors and raise capital and all that sort of thing. So if you're young and doing this, find a co-founder, and I've got one of the ebooks I have that I give away for free is the 20 top reasons startups fail.
Okay.
And it's based on a research and study done by, I think it was PitchBook. I forget now because I wrote this 8 or 10 years ago. But it goes through the percentage of failure. And the biggest reason companies fail, which is almost 40%, is because they discover there's no need for the product. Now,
Uh,
there's no excuse for that. If you do your market research and your competitive intelligence, you ought to be able to eliminate that opportunity in the first week or month by doing your market research well. And most people don't do enough market research. They might go after a pain or they might go after something they think is valuable.
yeah. Yeah.
But that 40% failure rate is going to happen, especially if you're not flexible and listening to the marketplace and
Yeah.
adjusting and pivoting
Yeah.
as you get feedback. I think one of the reasons the 5 products I launched at Thompson were so successful was because I got on a plane at 5:30 in the morning and I flew from Boston to New York and I had breakfast with clients. And then I went in the trading rooms and I walked around and looked over their shoulder and understood their workflow and their mentality and what their problems were and where they spent their time. You've got to get intimate with your
Yeah.
customers and with
Yeah.
your prospects to really understand, what's going to help them the most.
That's right.
And you've got to have two things to grow a scalable company. You've got to be differentiated. And by that, I mean different than everyone else in the same niche.
Mhm.
And you've got to have protection around that differentiation so that everyone that sees what you're doing can't go out and copy it the next day. Right. And I've got a graph that shows that. And it's how every good investor thinks, whether they know it or not. They're looking for something that's different than what's else out there because that drives down your marketing and sales costs. Now clients are coming to you instead of you having to spend money on marketing if you're unique, right?
Yeah.
Word of mouth works and word of mouth is free, right? And the second thing is, what's your moat or your barriers to entry around that business?
Mhm.
That can be trade secrets internally, it can be processes, it can be patents, it can be copyrights and software, it can be your training methods, your onboarding methods. we teach 17 different ways to build a moat around a business at the CEO boot camp. Most companies rely on one, and they ought to have five or six.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. So that most rely on one and they ought to have five or six. That's good to know right there.
Yeah.
So, wow. Wow. Okay. And and I can guarantee you most entrepreneurs don't get the other part that you talked about, which is putting themselves in a class of one, that there is nobody else who does. I mean, you didn't word it that way, but
Yeah.
that's essentially
And
what
you,
you
you
meant.
can
It's like,
always niche down into smaller markets.
yeah,
One misconception of entrepreneurs is I want to tell the venture capitalists I got a $1 trillion market or $100 billion
yes,
market.
the
No
opportunity is
startup,
huge.
yeah, no startup has ever been successful without niching down first. Okay. Everyone thinks the opposite. They think Facebook started as Facebook. Facebook didn't start as Facebook. Facebook started at Harvard
Yeah.
as as a dating site
Yes.
for college students,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
then expanded. Airbnb found the biggest pain by going into markets where the hotels always sold out for conventions at a particular time every year.
Okay.
That was when the customers had the most pain to be willing to sleep on someone else's couch, right? Because they
Ah,
couldn't get a hotel, right? Every company you look into, you will ultimately find they niche down to a small ideal, ICP, ideal client profile or customer target. You've got to start with a niche, and that niche should be, hopefully it's a 50 or $100 million market in the near future,
mhm.
but it shouldn't be a 10 or 20 or $50 billion market, because that's where you're going to wind up fighting 800-pound gorillas, and you're going to need $100 million of capital to do it very rapidly. So you can always make yourself more differentiated by niching down to a smaller market or niche.
And I had not heard that story about Airbnb, so I did not know that. And
No.
I saw that movie about Facebook, so I knew that they started on the college campus and stuff. But the Airbnb story, I did not know that. And so that's
Well, I've challenged people to find me any company that started
where they
with a
are.
really huge market. And no one ever has answered that question for me. There might be one out there. There could be an exception, but a common answer is Facebook or Salesforce, right? So no,
Yeah.
Salesforce went after the traveling salesman. All their advertising was in airports, right? Because those are the people. It was one of the first SaaS software, right, that you needed to take on the road to dial in,
Okay.
right? And so they found the most pain in the traveling salespeople, and their sales and marketing distribution was airports.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow. I love hearing stories like that because it really sets some powerful context. Because you're right, so many people you ask a lot of entrepreneurs, well, who do you serve? Well, I serve so many people. And
That's the last thing an investor want to hear is we
yeah,
serve everybody, because that
yes,
says you don't know how to market your
yeah,
product to
yeah,
the people with the most pain.
yeah,
And the answer is always a matrix that should be built out over time of markets getting bigger and bigger and bigger, so that you have a portfolio of markets or a portfolio of products, because then you're not going head to head with Google and Apple and all the
yeah,
other 800-pound gorillas.
yeah, yeah. My friend Ron Lynch, he was the marketing guy behind the GoPro camera. And I mean that is a fascinating story too.
And they probably went after one sport at a time,
Yeah,
right?
that's exactly what they did.
So they had
All
one product, but a
oh,
portfolio of distribution channels,
yeah,
because they went after skiers, and then they went after hikers, and then they went after scuba divers, and.
yes. Yeah. Yeah, and that's exactly what they did is niche by niche by niche.
Yeah, yeah,
And all these different ad campaigns. And so,
yeah. Well, the
yeah.
military would never do anything else, right? You form a beachhead, right, to stabilize your revenue and to validate that your product is robust in a very small area that you can control, and then you expand from that beachhead.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Bob, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation today. This was really awesome. For me, this was fascinating. I love hearing stories. I mean, and and for those of you listening, like I said, we've included the resources that Bob mentioned, and so use those resources. And Bob, once again, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation today, and I'm excited to get this out there.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, and I hope we've inspired some people to take that leap into entrepreneurship because it's practically the only way to change the world nowadays for the
That's
better.
right. That's right. Absolutely.